Hello, this is Curt Pringle, and I'm continuing the series on talking issues in California. And this is a series where we try to talk about public policy issues in the state, things that oftentimes get ignored or we hear about but don't understand the backstory of that. So today we get to talk about housing with a housing expert, actually an affordable housing expert in California, my friend Laura Archuleta with Jamboree Housing, the president and CEO of Jamboree Housing. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Kurt. Happy to be here.
Yeah, good. Tell us about who Jamboree Housing is.
Great. Yeah. So Jamboree Housing Corporation is a 30 plus year old nonprofit right here, headquartered in Orange County. We work statewide and we develop housing for folks who are needing housing that's currently not being met by the marketplace.
Good. So Jamboree, though, is founded in Orange County, named after the street.
Well, yes. So early on, we were founded by the City Council of Irvine,
Yes.
who wanted affordable housing to be built in that planned community. And then, as politics changed, and they do with city councils, as we all know, we had to go outside of Irvine to continue our development. So we now are a statewide operation with our corporate office still in Irvine, although not on Jamboree any longer. But we also have an office in Sacramento, as well as work down in San Diego, and now in the Silicon Valley.
Awesome. And you know how the street Jamboree got its name, right?
Well, I do because I was a very long time Girl Scout. So
Yes.
I know that it was affiliated with the Boy Scouts.
Yes.
Yes,
The National Jamboree was held in
yes,
Irvine, and therefore the way to get there was on that road.
that road.
Yeah,
That's right. It went
exactly.
all the way to the beach, right?
I don't know.
I
I
think it
wasn't old enough for that jamboree, but I was long serving in Boy Scouts. So anyway, that's the diversion. I shouldn't go that direction. So really, Jamboree Housing is a housing developer.
Well, we are. So we started as an affordable housing developer, and about 10 years into our operations, we saw that our residents really needed some additional support. So we got into this thinking of trying to break the cycle of poverty. So we started implementing resident services at our properties. And so now, flash forward 32 years, later, we have a full services company along with our development operations going.
Yeah. So not only so Jamboree has a construction company, you build housing. You have a management company, you manage the housing you build. I don't think you've sold any units, right?
Right.
You build and you retain so you can manage, and then you provide services, social services, and otherwise services to the population that lives in your
Yeah, it's
properties.
surprising to folks when they hear, oh, we're a housing developer, but we actually do everything. So we find the sites, we get them entitled, we put together the 5 to 7 layers of financing that's needed for affordable housing, and then we put that all together. We develop it, and right, we have an in-house construction company. Then we have a whole asset management team that works with property management to lease up the properties and get the services going. At our family properties, we have social emotional development classes for our children that live in the property, as well as some parenting and other life skills classes for our parents. And then at our special needs properties, we have specific services to the special needs. We have some frail elderly, as well as folks who are coming from homelessness that are living with chronic mental illness. So then we'll have
Mhm.
full wraparound services for their needs at the properties themselves.
Yeah. So let's talk break that into pieces. So kind of the foundation of Jamboree Housing is the development of what, however you put it, serving the population that doesn't
Yes,
currently have housing, which the biggest component of that is based on income. People
that's right.
in Orange County, where everyone knows housing prices, but most people should know rental prices are extremely high. The big question is, how do those properties, I have a single friend, recently single, and he's trying to find an apartment, and he said, I can't find an apartment less than 2,500 plus $2,500 a month. And you know, a single person or a low income family, though in a county like this, there's very few places that they can live. So affordable housing really is to address that population. Um, and that's primarily the population you serve, correct?
Absolutely. And it's interesting. So we call it kind of affordable workforce housing, and people use all different terms, but really, so I use my daughter as an example now. She's 25. She's got a master's degree. She's in the process of trying to find her first kind of entry into what she wants to do for her career. But in the meantime, she's working full time at Lululemon, at the mall.
Mm-hmm.
And so she, in her mind, thought, which is interesting because I've been in this business for a very long time, but she thought I work full time at the mall. Lululemon pays well. I think with their sales bonuses, they're up into the low 20 something dollars an hour. And went and looked at apartments, and she said, Mom, I don't qualify to live in even a studio apartment here and we're in North Orange County. And it's like, no, you don't. Have you not been listening to what I do, right? Because people think
Right.
you need housing, you need to get in some type of workforce affordable housing because you're not working. That's not the case,
Yeah.
right? That's not the case
Right.
here in Orange County with where rents are so
Right.
high.
Well, and serving 8 years as mayor of Anaheim, there's no question a housing challenge in the city of Anaheim. You have a lot of service workers, resort area workers are defined as service workers, people who work, be it at Disneyland or primarily at hotels in the myriad of services there. And I I just found that when people said there is no housing challenge, we have plenty of housing in Anaheim. Many families of with kids live in a one-bedroom apartment. I remember this busboy who worked at Morton's. He was the breadwinner for the family. He and his wife and their daughter and their son's wife and their son's baby lived in a two-bedroom apartment. And people would say, "Well, why did he do that?" Well, that was what he could afford. And so I think a lot of the challenge people miss as to this is just not a handout. This is how um, you're looking to address the needs of ensuring you have a workforce to be able to perform the jobs within the communities that we live. So the state kind of looks at this and says every county has an average median income and therefore looks to see how much money someone could spend from each of those income levels on their housing needs, and therefore they're classified into different slots: low income, very low income, moderate, and market rate, right? I mean, that's kind
Yeah,
of,
no, absolutely. And so you look at the workforce in your community right now to determine what are the housing needs. And I agree with you. I worked in college. I was a server at El Cholo's Mexican restaurant, which some of you might know. It's throughout Southern California, great restaurant. But there were long time cooks and busboys and servers that had been there, and they had their whole families and extended families living in one bedroom apartments
yeah,
because of that. And we have talked over the years when you were mayor about what does that do to neighborhoods when you look at a neighborhood and there's no parking, right? Because there's so many streets,
right,
so many cars on the street.
right.
And you know that there's overcrowding going on, and that overcrowding is a result of not having housing that's affordable to the workforce in that
Yeah,
community.
I think I've told you the story before, but it's consistent to today. The house in Anaheim next door to my sister and brother-in-law, uh, it was built as a three-bedroom house, probably 1,200 square feet, built in the 70s, like much of the housing stock in West Anaheim. And there are three families now that live in that house. Um, and with three families, I think there might be 12 people. Now, now, when you talk about infrastructure development, when that was built, I think there was supposed to be, it was assumed there would be 3.5 people living in
Yeah.
a traditional three-bedroom house, right? And yet now you have 12. So the question is, how does that impact a neighborhood or
Yes.
quality of life for everybody? And it impacts them because there are more cars.
Yes.
Instead of one or two cars for that family, or three when the kid gets his
Yes.
license, now there's as many as 10 cars that could possibly be at that house. The sewer system, which nobody really talks about, the greatest impacted sewer system area in Anaheim is not where all the new development goes because they put in new sewer systems. It's where the older neighborhoods that now have multiple families living in a single house. So the big question, though, a lot of people bring up, why does government need to be involved at all? Why doesn't housing just get built in because of the free market and people come and say, you know what, I can make money in this and I can build housing, and therefore if I build more housing, then because of market principles, rents will go down because there'll be a lot of supply. What's
Right.
wrong with that argument?
Well, I mean, at some point, if you had absolutely no land use controls at all, and you could just build whatever type of housing you wanted, small, manufactured, maybe save some money, build smaller units, different things, you're going to impact the market a bit. So you're going to see rents come down some. We're so far behind here in California that you really can't even like think about getting to that point because it would take 30 years of just opening up and having development run to get to where rents get down
Right.
to where
And
you
as we
can be
talked
serving
about,
that
so many neighborhoods today are opposed to any
with.
type of development, be it affordable housing, be it a for sale property, be it a market rate apartment. So, so,
Yes.
so then to get the cost of buying the property, going through the entitlements and building, to get that to be, quote, an affordable option, you need affordable housing developers need to bring in money from other sources to be able to do that.
Right, and we have always, well, I worked in city government, as you know, before I came to Jamboree, so I have always been a proponent of local control. And we want our cities, I mean, to identify sites where they want housing, at the full spectrum of housing. And
Mm.
so hopefully there's a piece in there that is identified for affordable workforce or affordable special needs or seniors.
So you're talking about zoning issues.
Zoning,
I'm
right,
talking
right.
about how do you pay for the construction?
Yeah, yeah. So in order to pay for it, to get it built at an affordable component, then you layer in all of the different funding sources.
Yeah, but share with the public how,
How that
generally what
works.
that would be, though. No, it's
Sure.
it's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So typically cities have some amount of funding that they're getting that is dictated to be used for affordable housing. It may be a grant coming from the federal government. It may be some local resources. Historically, you had redevelopment, had a
mhm.
set aside for housing. And so we look at those dollars. We look at if there's any surplus land in a city. When you look at with all the technology that's happening and things changing, cities end up with surplus land. That land can come into affordable housing and help meet those needs. And then
So that covers some of the land
some of the
cost,
land cost,
right?
and then we've got the construction cost
So
coming
cities
in.
don't necessarily just give, in some cases they may, but they don't necessarily just give land for affordable housing development. You
Right,
you
they can, we would love them to,
right?
but they often, the land will come and then they'll be paid some share of any cash flow that is received off of these properties once they're built towards the
So
land.
so oftentimes you find a piece of property, if the city can participate, uh, you either can buy it or you have a 55-year lease on it, since all the
Sure.
affordable housing projects are basically 55. But that's just scratching the surface, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely. And so then the next, after we work with our city, we'll go to the county. And here in Orange County, you have the housing authority at the county, and we'll ask for what could be some type of rent subsidy component in this stacking. And if you get a rent subsidy commitment, it means that the residents only have to pay 30% of their income. So again, if they're working at Lululemon, they're only paying 30% of their income, or if they're working in the resort district, wherever they're working, and then the rest of it's paid through the county housing authority.
mhm. And that housing authority money primarily comes from the federal government, though.
From the federal government. That's
So when
right.
people say, well, HUD or
Yes,
those
yeah,
dollars or something like that, well,
yeah.
in most cases, those are distributed through housing authorities, either within cities or the county. And
Right.
most cities in Orange County go through the Orange County Housing Authority.
That's correct. There's
Yeah,
only 3 cities that have their own housing authorities, and so the remainder do
right.
go through the county. So then, once we have worked with the county, to see what funding or subsidies we can receive. Then we go on up to the state of California. The state of California has a half a dozen or so different funding programs that they have set aside for different groups of people. So you might remember back when what they called the millionaire's tax passed, that funding is specifically for housing folks living with chronic mental illness. So if that's our targeted population for a development, then we'll go into that pot of money.
Right.
There's the greenhouse gas initiative funding that has come in to fund projects that are closer to higher transportation centers. So for developing there, we apply to that pot. So it's a very complicated
So you
structure.
identify
budget.
land, you get some help from cities in
Yeah.
many cases, possibly from the county, then to the state. Then you have traditional financing.
Correct. So we typically will have a mortgage, just like you would have a mortgage on your home. And that is whatever the amount of the rent that our targeted population can pay.
Right.
And so you get a first mortgage, and then you would have funding, let's say the loan to cover the land from the city. So maybe that's just paid out of cash flow. And then you'd get some other amount of subsidy from usually the state, millions of dollars to
Right.
make this development happen.
Yeah, I guess I want to make sure people hear all of that layering of traditional financing, but also government support for the purpose of getting the rents low enough to address people who are maybe at 50% of the area median income, right? Or
right.
that, because that's defined as low income. And the state sets these definitions, right? And then, I mean, a lot of people have heard about things like RHNA, or Regional Housing Needs Assessment, that the state tells every city through their functionaries that that city has to develop housing in the low income, very low income, or moderate levels. So it's not just the state or the city saying, hey, we want to do this. It's also a requirement in state law.
That's right. So, every city has a general plan, and as part of your planning document, your general plan, you have a housing element.
Mm-hmm.
And in that housing element, you have your regional housing needs that have been identified by the state through their local planning agencies. And they're looking at job creation, job growth, as well as births, and they're projecting out, right, and transportation, projecting out the needs in that community. So it's very hard for a community to say, well, we're built out when you're still creating jobs, you still have needs, and you're still increasing the population through births.
Yeah, right.
And so, yeah, so we look at reuse of sites, we look at infill. We've been doing more and more of this. I had a phone call yesterday with an organization that was a longtime gas provider here in California, and they have a lot of old gas station sites that are now part of little strip malls that they'd like to redo, and they think that those might be great opportunities,
interesting.
For affordable housing. And so
Right.
we look at all types of sites to see where we can find
So
opportunity.
as we kind of wrap up here, the state, the governor's office has put a high priority on developing housing in a category called permanent supportive housing, which is after someone moves out of homelessness and moves into a permanent living condition with wraparound social services. That's that permanent supportive housing piece. I know Jamboree Housing has done a tremendous amount of work in that area to serve that population. I know that firsthand because we had a project in Anaheim, one of the first, that was for chronically homeless people with who suffered with mental illness, and we were able to get that project approved in Anaheim, and I think it's been a pretty successful project.
Yeah, it absolutely has been successful. And I think the model to end homelessness is about the housing first model. It's about taking folks, whether they're coming directly off the street, if they're coming from shelters or social services agency, getting them into a permanent housing situation. So in our case, we're building apartments, getting them into an apartment and bringing in full wraparound services. So in all of our housing, whether it's permanent supportive housing or whether it's housing for the lower end of the workforce or senior housing, senior frail housing, whatever category, our belief is that you need to have safe, decent housing that you can afford as your base. And it's a platform then for a strong, interwoven community where you can participate in that community, whether that is through after school programs with your kids. If you're living with chronic mental illness, it's ensuring that you, on that end, that you're getting the services that you need, that there's somebody there on site who can help you if you're struggling, if you need a medication adjustment, they make sure they get you in there. So the goal with permanent supportive housing specifically is that those folks will never become homeless again. It doesn't mean they necessarily have to stay in our development. They could then move on into an affordable housing situation. They get a higher paying job. They move into market rate housing. They buy a home. It's the full continuum of
Right.
housing.
Right.
I think of it, and I know we're running out of time, but I think of it now almost as freeways, right? You need to keep the flow going on your freeway. You've got to have on ramps and off ramps for different types of housing for people to find what their needs are. You might have families whose kids, now have moved out. They want to sell their home. They need to have an option to move into something smaller. Maybe they want to rent. They want to take advantage of the high housing market and keep their equity. So it's just about keeping the flow going at all.
Yeah.
That's at the spectrum.
Well, the whole purpose of these little video series is to talk about issues that people hear about but may not know the depth. And I'm glad we were able to have you come in today, Laura Archuleta, President and CEO of Jamboree Housing, to kind of address some of the issues of affordable housing development in California. So thanks for being here.